The HOA president called cops on me at midnight for trespassing on my own lake, land I've owned for 10 years. But while she screamed at me to leave, I knew her secret. She'd been sneaking onto my property for months. What I discovered about her midnight visits would destroy her perfect suburban empire. Tonight, the battle for my land turns deadly, and the proof is in the poison she poured into my water. Red and blue lights shattered my peace. Deputy Brian Walsh, my high school fishing buddy, stepping out of his cruiser. Behind him, Patricia Ellison, HOA queen, striding across my dirt in designer heels. That's him, officer. He's trespassing on HOA land, she spat. My fist clenched around the deed in my pocket. Brian wouldn't meet my eyes. Dan, Mrs. Ellison says this lake belongs to Crestview Heights. Comment where you're watching from. This battle for my land is about to get insane. The night had started perfect. Just me and the memories dancing in the firelight. I'd set up my old camping chair by the water's edge, same spot where Emily and I used to sit for hours, watching the sunset paint the lake gold. The cooler beside me held nothing fancy, just a six-pack of beer and some sandwiches I'd thrown together after my shift at the warehouse. This was my Friday night ritual, my way of keeping her close even after 5 years without her warm hand in mine. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks up toward stars that seemed extra bright tonight, like they were putting on a show just for me. I could almost hear Emily's laugh in the wind rustling through the cottonwoods, almost feel her head on my shoulder as we'd plan all the things we'd do at this place. Maybe build a dock, stock the lake with bass, host barbecues for the guys from work. Then the sirens shattered everything. Dust swirled in their headlight beams, and I recognized Deputy Brian Walsh stepping out of the lead vehicle. We'd been tight back in high school, used to skip class together to go fishing, but that felt like a lifetime ago now. Behind him came the real trouble. Patricia Ellison, president of the Crestview Heights HOA, marching toward me in designer heels that had no business being on ranch land. Her chin jutted out like she owned the whole county, not just the fancy neighborhood next door. "That's him, officer," she announced, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal mastermind instead of a tired 50-year-old warehouse manager trying to enjoy his own property. "This man is trespassing on HOA land, disturbing our residents with his illegal camping." Brian looked uncomfortable, scratching his head the way he always did when stuck between a rock and a hard place. "Dan, I'm sorry about this, but we got a complaint. Mrs. Ellison here says this lake belongs to Crestview Heights." His eyes kept darting between me and Patty like he was trying to figure out which way to jump. I stood up slowly, my fists clenching involuntarily as I felt my blood start to boil. "This lake's our home, Dan." Emily's words echoed in my mind, the promise I'd made to protect what we'd built together. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded land ownership papers I always kept with me, worn from years of carrying them like a talisman. "Brian, you know me better than this. I've owned this ranch for 10 years, bought it with every penny my parents left me and what Emily and I saved up. These papers prove every square inch of this land, including the lake, belongs to me." Patty snatched the papers before Brian could take them. Her manicured nails glinted in the firelight as she made a big show of examining them. "These could be as fake as his claim," she scoffed, tossing them back at me with a dismissive wave. "Everyone knows this lake has always been part of our community's watershed rights." Brian shifted his weight, looking more uncomfortable by the second. "Look, Dan, I need to sort this out properly. Mrs. Ellison's been telling me about some HOA initiatives that could really help with department funding, career advancement opportunities for local law enforcement." He couldn't quite meet my eyes as he said it. "But for tonight, I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and head home, just to keep the peace while we figure this out." The unfairness of it all made my jaw clench so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Here I was, being run off my own land by some power-hungry suburban queen who probably couldn't tell a catfish from a trout. My papers don't lie, Patty, I snapped, gathering up my camping gear with sharp, angry movements. Even if you do. She just smiled that fake smile of hers, the one that probably worked on the soccer moms and retired executives in her little kingdom. This land's not yours, buddy, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. And soon, everyone will know it. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mind raced back to my parents' faces when they'd handed me the check for this place. Their life's dream of owning land finally coming true through me. My eyes blazed as I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing but greed dressed up in a pantsuit. I threw my gear in the truck bed, each item landing with a bang that echoed across the water. Brian walked me to my vehicle, his hand on my shoulder, in what might have been sympathy or might have been making sure I actually left. Dan, we'll get this sorted out, I promise. Just give me some time to look into it properly. But his words felt hollow, especially with Patty standing there with that smug grin plastered across her face, already tasting victory. As I drove away, her image burned in my rearview mirror like a bad omen, standing there by my lake like she'd already claimed it. Patty thinks she's queen, I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. But my papers say game over. That's when my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. My blood ran cold as I read the words, "Leave the lake where you'll lose more than land." I pulled over on the dark ranch road, staring at the message while my heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't just about some property dispute anymore. Someone was threatening me, and I had a sick feeling Patty's ambitions went deeper than anyone in Crestview Heights realized. The question burning in my mind as I sat there in the darkness, who else was in on this scheme? And just how far were they willing to go to steal what was mine? The kitchen table groaned under the weight of every document I owned about the ranch. Papers spread out like a puzzle I had to solve before they came for me again. My land papers, the original deed, tax records going back a decade, everything that proved this place was mine. But something caught my eye on the old town hall map I'd requested years ago, a detail I'd never noticed before. Right where my lake sat, someone had penciled in the word shared in fading ink. My stomach dropped as I traced the marking with my finger. Was this the ammunition Patty thought she had against me? The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed, too focused on finding the truth buried in these yellowed pages. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, the sound lonely and defiant. Exactly how I felt sitting here in my empty house. I needed answers, and I knew exactly who might have them. Evelyn Harper had lived in these parts since before Crestview Heights was even a gleam in some developer's eye. If anyone knew the real history of this land, it was her. I dialed her number, grateful when she picked up on the second ring despite the late hour. "Dan Carver," she said, her voice carrying that knowing tone that made you think she had a crystal ball hidden somewhere. "I was wondering when you'd call. Let me guess. Patty Ellison's been sniffing around your lake?" When I told her about the police visit and the shared marking on the map, she let out a dry laugh. "Oh, honey, I've seen HOA signs pop up on folks' land before. Patty's not the first to try stealing what isn't hers. Come by tomorrow morning and bring those papers. There's something you need to know about our dear HOA president." Her words gave me hope, but it was short-lived. My laptop dinged with a new email, and Patty's name in the sender line made my jaw tighten. The message was wrapped in legal language, but the threat was clear. Cease and desist from accessing HOA property or face immediate legal action. According to her creative interpretation of property lines, the lake had always belonged to Crestview Heights, and my illegal occupation was damaging their community resources. The sheer audacity of it made me laugh out loud, a harsh sound in the quiet kitchen. But the laugh died when I saw the attachments. Photos of me at the lake from multiple angles, dates stamped over the past several months. Someone had been watching me, documenting my every visit to my own property like I was some kind of criminal. The knock on my door the next morning came too early, aggressive and demanding. Through the peephole, I saw Todd Brennan, one of Patty's HOA board members, standing there in his cheap suit and nervous grin. The kind of guy who'd sell his grandmother for a commission, which made sense, since he worked at the used car lot in town. "Mr. Carver, I'm here with a generous offer from the HOA," he started before I'd even fully opened the door. "Sign over the lake rights, and we'll make this all go away. No legal battles, no public embarrassment. Mrs. Ellison is even prepared to offer a small compensation for your cooperation." The papers in his sweaty hands trembled slightly, and I noticed he kept glancing back at his car like he was ready to bolt. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. His grin turned mean, the mask slipping to show the rat underneath. "Then you'll lose everything. The lake, the ranch, maybe even that job of yours. Mrs. Ellison has connections you can't imagine." But I dealt with bullies before, and Todd Brennan was amateur hour compared to some of the guys I'd faced down at the warehouse. "Go ahead, Todd," I said, keeping my voice steady, even as my mind raced through the implications of their threat. "My papers don't just talk, they win." I kept my voice steady even as my mind raced. He backed up when I stepped forward, that nervous grin faltering as he realized I wasn't some pushover he could intimidate. "You're making a big mistake, Carver. This is your last chance to walk away with something." But he was already retreating to his car, my steady gaze following him until he peeled out of my driveway in a cloud of dust. I waited until he was gone before allowing myself a deep breath, then headed straight to Evelyn's place, determined to find out what she knew about Patty's past. Evelyn's living room was like a museum of local history, photos and documents covering every surface. She handed me tea in a delicate china cup, then pulled out a folder that looked like it had been waiting for this moment. "Remember the Garrison family? Used to own that pretty spread near the creek?" I nodded vaguely, recalling they'd moved away suddenly about 5 years back. Well, they didn't exactly choose to leave. HOA started claiming water rights, then mineral rights, then somehow their whole property line got adjusted in the county records. By the time they realized what was happening, they were already buried in legal fees. She pulled out a faded document, a court filing that showed the HOA had lost a similar case years before Patty's time. But here's the interesting part. I did some digging on our Patricia Ellison. That name ring any bells from Nevada? The document she showed me next made everything click into place. Todd's nervous energy, Brian's sudden interest in career advancement, the systematic way they were coming after my land. It all made sense now. Todd practically shook when I confronted him outside the grocery store that afternoon, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "You don't know what she's capable of," he whispered. Actually whispered, like Patty might hear him from across town. "Just sign the papers, man. It's not worth what she'll do to you." But his fear just strengthened my resolve. I drove home clutching the photo I'd grabbed from Evelyn's collection. Patty by a lake, eerily similar to mine, holding what looked like a canister marked with hazard symbols. Emily's words echoed again. "This lake's our home, Dan." I set the photo on my kitchen table next to our wedding picture and made a promise to both of us that I'd protect what we'd built. The loud thud that shook my whole house pulled me from my thoughts, rattling the windows and sending my coffee mug sliding across the table. I rushed outside, heart pounding, to find my fence gate hanging off its hinges and fresh tire tracks leading toward the lake. In the fading light, I could see something floating in the water that hadn't been there this morning, an oily sheen spreading across the surface like a toxic rainbow. The war for my land had just escalated, and the question burning in my mind was whether Patty had already started poisoning my lake to force me out. The Crestview Heights clubhouse looked like a fortress of suburban pretension, All marble columns and perfect landscaping that probably cost more than my truck. I walked through those double doors knowing I was entering enemy territory, but Evelyn had insisted I needed to hear what Patty was planning with my own ears. The main hall was packed with residents, the smell of expensive perfume mixing with coffee from the gourmet bar they'd set up in the corner. I found a seat in the back, trying to blend in despite my work boots and flannel shirt among all the golf attire and yoga pants. Patty stood at the podium like a general addressing her troops, her voice carrying that fake concern that made my skin crawl. Friends, we're facing a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our community, she began, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying for their souls. The lake that we've all enjoyed, that our children play near, that adds such beauty to our neighborhood. It's under attack by someone who cares nothing for our safety or property values. The crowd murmured, heads turning to look for this villain she was describing. I had to bite my tongue to keep from standing up right then. She continued, pulling up a presentation that showed aerial photos of my ranch, my lake circled in red like a target. This individual has been contaminating our watershed with illegal camping, threatening the delicate ecosystem we've worked so hard to protect. The lies flowed so smoothly, I almost admired her skill, watching faces in the crowd shift from concern to anger. A man in the front row, probably some retired executive, stood up and pointed right at me. That's him. That's the troublemaker who's been ruining our community. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and suddenly, I was the center of attention. Dozens of eyes turning to stare at the outsider in their midst. But then a woman near the window leaned toward her neighbor and whispered loud enough for me to hear. I saw HOA folks sneaking by that lake at night last week. What were they doing there if it's not their property? I stood slowly, pulling out the documents Evelyn had given me, my hands steady despite the hostile atmosphere. Since I'm being accused, maybe you'd all like to see some actual facts instead of Mrs. Ellison's creative storytelling. I held up the old court filing, making sure everyone could see the official seal. This shows the HOA losing a similar land grab attempt 15 years ago. Seems like some habits die hard. Patty's face went through several shades of red before she composed herself. And then came the performance of a lifetime. Her eyes welled up with tears, actual tears, as she pressed a hand to her chest. We're just trying to save our community. This man wants to destroy everything we've built, everything we've worked for. The fake crying was so over the top, I almost laughed, but some of the residents were buying it, clustering around her with tissues and sympathetic murmurs. You're all being played, I said loud enough to cut through the drama. Check the town hall records yourselves. See who really owns what. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Voices raised in argument, neighbors turning on each other as doubts crept in. Patty tried to regain control, her nails tapping furiously on the podium as she called for order. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I made my way through the crowd, deliberately dropping my folder where Patty would see it, watching her eyes widen as she recognized some of the photos inside. You want to play games? I said quietly as I passed her. Fine, but I play to win. I caught Evelyn's eye across the room and gave her a wink. Patty's a performer, but I'm stealing the show. She grinned back, clearly enjoying the drama more than any of her soap operas. The best part came when Patty tried to rally her supporters for a final push, only to have someone ask why the HOA had been seen at the lake after midnight. The question hung in the air like a bad smell, and Patty's fake smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it back on. I slipped out during the confusion, but not before making sure Patty heard me telling Evelyn about the security cameras I was installing. Got them on sale, though. Hope they work. The guy said they're kind of faulty, might not catch everything. ... It was a calculated risk, betting that Patty's arrogance would make her careless. But the flash of interest in her eyes told me I'd played it right. Back at the ranch, I spent the rest of the day setting up my cameras, making sure they covered every approach to the lake. The ones I showed obviously were the decoys, old units I bought from a pawn shop. The real cameras were hidden in birdhouses and fence posts, tiny things that could see in the dark and stream straight to my laptop. As I worked, I kept thinking about Emily and how she'd probably be laughing at all this drama. "You always did like your spy movies," I could hear her saying. And the memory made me smile despite everything. Night fell like a curtain, and I settled in to watch my laptop screen, figuring if Patty was going to make a move, it would be soon. The rally had shaken her control, and people like her didn't handle that well. Sure enough, just after midnight, my cameras caught movement by the lake. A cloaked figure emerged from the tree line, moving with purpose toward the water's edge. They carried something heavy, struggling with the weight, and as they turned, the moonlight caught the glint of an HOA badge on their jacket. I zoomed in, my heart racing as I watched them uncap what looked like an industrial container and begin pouring a dark liquid into my lake. The substance spread like oil, darker than the night water, and I could almost smell the chemicals through the screen. I saved the footage to multiple drives, my hands shaking with anger and anticipation. Was this proof that the HOA wasn't just trying to steal my land? They were willing to poison it to get their way. The figure retreated back into the woods, probably thinking they'd gotten away with it, having no idea they'd just given me the ammunition I needed to bring Patty's whole empire crashing down. I backed up the footage one more time, then closed my laptop and stared out at my contaminated lake. Emily's favorite spot, now tainted by greed and corruption. "This lake's our home," I whispered to the darkness, feeling her presence stronger than I had in years. Tomorrow, I'd take this evidence to Brian, force him to choose between his old friend and his new career opportunities. But tonight, I sat with my anger. Let it fuel my determination, because Patty Ellison had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The question now wasn't whether I'd win. It was how much I'd make her pay for what she'd done to our lake. The footage on my laptop screen made my blood boil every time I watched it, but I forced myself to review it again, cataloging every detail that would bury Patty Ellison. My hidden cameras had caught everything. Todd Brennan and 3 other HOA goons trudging through my property at 2 o'clock in the morning, hammering no trespassing signs around my lake like they owned the place. The best part was Todd's face when he slipped in the mud, cursing loud enough to wake the dead while his buddies laughed. But the laughter died when Patty herself appeared in frame, dressed in all black like some suburban ninja, directing them to pour barrel after barrel of thick, toxic sludge into my water. The lake turned a sickly green in the moonlight, the kind of color that meant death for every fish, frog, and bird that called it home. I saved the footage to my 5th backup drive, paranoid but prepared, knowing this evidence was worth more than gold. Emily's photo sat on my desk, her smile seeming to encourage me as I typed up a detailed report for Brian, complete with timestamps and screenshots that would be impossible to ignore. I found Brian at the sheriff's station the next morning, hunched over paperwork like the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. "We need to talk," I said, sliding the USB drive across his desk. "And this time, you need to listen with your brain, not your wallet." He looked tired, older than his 38 years. And when he saw what was on that drive, he looked even worse. "Jesus, Dan," he whispered, watching Patty direct the poisoning of my lake with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. I knew she was pushy about that career advancement stuff, but this... He rubbed his face, the guilt plain in his eyes. "I'm an idiot. She played me like a fiddle, promised me connections, told me I'd make sheriff within 2 years if I helped with community relations." The confession hung between us, heavy with years of friendship betrayed for ambition. But Brian was still a good cop underneath it all, and seeing actual crimes on camera flipped a switch in him. I'll open an investigation immediately. This is destruction of property, illegal dumping, environmental crimes. Patty just bought herself a world of hurt. Playing the long game required patience I didn't know I had, but Emily's memory kept me focused. I wrote what Patty would see as a surrender letter, each word calculated to feed her ego while setting my trap. Mrs. Ellison, I wrote, you win. The legal fees, the threats, the damage to my property, I can't fight anymore. I'll sign whatever papers you want. Just please stop destroying the only thing I have left of my wife. I even added a shaky signature, like my hands were trembling with defeat. Evelyn delivered it for me, playing the part of concerned neighbor perfectly. And within hours, Patty was crowing about her victory all over town. A victory party she threw that weekend was the talk of Crestview Heights. Neighbors congratulating her on protecting their community while she posed for photos like she'd just won the lottery. What they didn't see was how she snapped at Todd when he spilled wine on her carpet, her mask slipping to reveal the stress underneath, or how her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. I spent that evening by the lake, tossing stones into the poisoned water and letting myself feel the weight of what I was about to do. Each ripple reminded me of Emily's laugh, how she used to joke that I couldn't skip stones to save my life. This lake's our home, Emily, I muttered, watching the sickly green water lap at the shore. And I'm about to take it back. The letter might have said surrender, but every word was a lie. A net, closing around Patty while she celebrated. That letter's a trap, I said to the darkness, practicing what I'd say in court. And Patty is about to choke on her lies. I walked the perimeter of my property, checking my hidden cameras, making sure everything was still recording. The public believed I'd given up, but behind the scenes, I was building a case that would destroy Patty's credibility forever. Brian had quietly started interviewing witnesses, finding cracks in the HOA's story. Even some board members were getting nervous about what their president had dragged them into. Social media lit up with photos from Patty's party, champagne toasts and smug smiles flooding local community pages. She stood in the center of every shot, designer dress perfect, surrounded by supporters who had no idea they were celebrating a criminal. The comments were split, some praising her for protecting property values, others questioning why she was partying while a man lost his land. But Patty was too drunk on victory to notice the tide turning, too confident in her power to see the trap closing. I saved every photo, every comment, building a timeline of her arrogance that would play beautifully in court. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was providing evidence against herself with every boastful post, every picture of her raising a glass to theft and destruction. I closed my laptop and prepared for the final phase, my resolve hardening like steel. Tomorrow, I'd release the videos and watch her empire crumble. But tonight, I had one more move to make. I was heading inside when I saw it. My ranch gate, the heavy metal one my father had installed 20 years ago, hanging twisted and broken from its posts. Fresh tire marks showed where someone had rammed it, probably with a truck, leaving it destroyed beyond repair. But it was the note that made my blood run cold, pinned to the wreckage with a knife, Patty's handwriting clear as day. Give up or your lake's next. I laughed, actually laughed, standing there in the darkness, looking at her threat. The lake was already poisoned, my gate was destroyed, but she'd just given me written evidence of her harassment, in her own hand. I carefully photographed everything, texted the images to Brian with a simple message, "She's escalating." His response came quick, "Stay safe, we move tomorrow." I looked back at my broken gate, then at my poisoned lake, and felt something shift inside me. Patty thought she was winning, thought her threats would break me. But she had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, the whole world would see what she really was, and I'd be there to watch her fall, wearing the same smile she'd worn at her victory party. The only question left was whether she'd have the grace to admit defeat or if she'd go down swinging, taking as many people with her as she could. Morning came with Emily's letter in my hands, the one she'd written before the cancer took her, knowing I'd need her words when things got dark. I sat by the poisoned lake, ignoring the chemical smell, and read her shaky handwriting for the 100th time. This lake's our home, Dan. When I'm gone, it'll be our place still, where you can find me in every sunset, every ripple, every memory we made. Fight for it, my love. Don't let anyone take our home. The paper was soft from folding and unfolding, stained with old tears and new ones. But her strength flowed through every word. I remembered our last picnic here, how she'd insisted on coming, even though she could barely walk, how her smile had lit up the whole world as she watched the ducks paddle by. Promise me, she'd said, her hand cold in mine. Promise you'll keep this place. And I had, thinking I was just comforting a dying woman, not knowing her words would become my battle cry 5 years later. The video upload took 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours, my finger hovering over the button before I finally pushed it. HOA President Caught Poisoning Lake seemed like a bland title for something so explosive, but I wanted the evidence to speak for itself. By the time I'd finished my morning coffee, the view count was climbing past 1,000, and my phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. The comment section exploded. HOA Queen Evicted became a rallying cry, spreading across platforms I didn't even know existed. Someone had already made a meme of Patty's face photoshopped onto a villain from a superhero movie, and justice served comments poured in faster than I could read them. The best part was a message from a young resident of Crestview Heights. "We're with you, Dan. She's bullied us for years." More messages followed. Stories of HOA harassment, illegal fees, and property theft attempts that painted a picture of systematic corruption. By noon, local news had picked it up. By evening, Patty's desperate plea for sympathy was drowning in a sea of laughing emojis and court date predictions. Evelyn outdid herself, arriving at my door with Maria Gonzalez, a former neighbor who'd lost her garden to a suspicious HOA easement 3 years ago. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that witch," Maria said, fire in her eyes as she signed the witness statement. She had her goons tear up my grandmother's rose bushes, said they were violating community standards. Those roses came from Mexico, carried by my abuela as seeds. Irreplaceable. Her testimony added weight to our case, showing Patty's pattern of destroying what people loved most to force them into submission. We spent hours documenting every detail, building a timeline that showed how the HOA had systematically targeted properties adjacent to amenities they wanted to control. Evelyn contributed her own evidence, photos of HOA board members trespassing on various properties over the years, always at night, always with the same result: mysterious damage followed by generous offers to buy. "She's been playing this game for years," Evelyn said, sorting through her collection. But she finally picked the wrong target. The courthouse steps felt like a stage as I climbed them 3 days later, my lawyer carrying boxes of evidence while protesters waved signs reading "Save Our Lakes" and "HOA Corruption Stops Now." Inside, Patty sat with her high-powered legal team, trying to look confident despite the sweat beading on her forehead. When I presented the video evidence, the judge's face went through several expressions: disbelief, disgust, and finally, cold anger. "This is clear documentation of criminal activity," she stated, her voice cutting through Patty's lawyer's objections. "I'm ordering an immediate review of all property records involving the Crestview Heights HOA." the moment Patty tried to approach Maria during a recess, whispering something about reconsidering her testimony. The bailiff stepped in. The attempted witness tampering was so blatant, so desperate, that even Patty's own lawyer looked embarrassed. The judge's final ruling was everything I'd hoped for. The lake was confirmed as my property, with additional protections as a nature preserve to prevent future harassment. Patty's shriek of protest echoed through the courtroom, but the gavel had fallen. As I walked out of the courthouse, Brian handed me an envelope with a knowing look. Thought you might find this interesting. Did some digging on our friend Patty. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Nevada, 7 years old but still damning. The headline read, "Real estate manager loses massive lawsuit in land fraud scheme." There was Patty's photo, younger but with the same predatory smile, standing next to her lawyer husband as they left a Nevada courthouse in defeat. The article detailed how she'd tried to steal waterfront property from elderly residents using forged documents and intimidation tactics. One victim was quoted, "Patty laughed as she took my land, cried when she paid for it." The settlement had been in the millions, destroying her real estate career and forcing them to relocate. She thought she could run the same playbook here, Brian said, shaking his head. Guess she didn't count on you fighting back. I folded the article carefully. One more piece of ammunition for the battles ahead. Because something told me Patty wouldn't go down without trying to take everyone with her. That evening, I got the call that made everything worthwhile. The EPA was launching an investigation into the lake poisoning, and Patty was facing federal charges. The local news ran the story with the headline, "HOA President's Toxic Leadership Exposed," complete with footage of hazmat crews cleaning my lake. I stood by the water as they worked, watching the green poison slowly clear, thinking about Emily and how proud she'd be. "It's done," I said to the evening air, gripping the Nevada article tight. But my satisfaction was short-lived when my truck alarm started blaring. I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper, the writing hurried but familiar. "Drop the lawsuit or your ranch burns." The paper smelled like gasoline, a not-so-subtle threat that told me Patty was getting desperate. I looked around the darkening property, suddenly aware of every shadow, every rustle in the trees. She'd poisoned my lake, destroyed my gate, and now she was threatening arson. The question burning in my mind as I called Brian, who else was helping her? And how far would they go to protect their queen? The Nevada victim's words echoed in my mind as I researched Patricia Ellison's past. Patty laughed as she took my land, cried when she paid for it. The deeper I dug, the uglier the picture became. Court documents revealed she hadn't just lost that lawsuit, she'd been annihilated. Her real estate license revoked, her reputation destroyed, and her lawyer husband Richard nearly disbarred for his role in the scheme. They'd fled Nevada in disgrace, reinventing themselves in Texas, where nobody knew their history. But Patricia couldn't change her nature, only her address. The HOA presidency had given her a new kingdom to rule, new victims to exploit, and she'd learned from her mistakes, this time using proxies like Todd to do her dirty work, keeping her own hands technically clean. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, building a profile of a predator who'd simply changed hunting grounds. The humiliation in Nevada had twisted her, I realized, turned her from a greedy opportunist into someone with something to prove, someone who'd vowed never to lose again. Todd's midnight visit surprised me, though maybe it shouldn't have. He stood on my porch trembling, despite the warm night, looking like a man caught between a rock and a hard place. "She's lost it, Dan," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if Patty might materialize from the darkness. After the court ruling, she's been screaming at everyone, throwing things. She hired some hotshot lawyer from Dallas, Promise to bury you in legal fees until you crack." His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, and I noticed bruises on his wrist. She's planning something worse than the lake. I heard her on the phone talking about permanent solutions. The fear in his eyes was real, and I realized Todd wasn't just worried about losing his position. He was terrified of becoming Patty's scapegoat. "If this goes south, she'll pin everything on me. Say I acted without authorization, that I'm the one who poisoned the lake." He looked at me with desperate eyes. "I'll testify, tell them everything, but you've got to protect me from her." I agreed, seeing an opportunity to flip Patty's own soldier against her. Though I didn't trust Todd any further than I could throw him. My visit to the land office had a purpose beyond checking records. I wanted word to get back to Patty that I was planning something big. "Looking to expand your ranch?" the clerk asked, noticing the parcels I was researching. "Something like that," I said loud enough for the HOA member behind me to hear. Amazing what's for sale these days, if you know where to look. The seed was planted, and by afternoon, Patty was in full damage control mode. She called an emergency community meeting, tears streaming down her face as she painted herself as the victim. "Dan Carver is trying to destroy our community," she sobbed, her performance worthy of an Oscar. "He's fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, turned you all against me when all I've ever done is protect our neighborhood." Some residents bought it, gathering around her with tissues and sympathy, but others exchanged skeptical glances. When someone asked about the lake poisoning video, she claimed it was doctored, that I was a tech wizard who'd created deep fakes to frame her. The desperation was showing, cracks in her perfect facade growing wider with each lie. Brian's confrontation with Patty happened in the sheriff's station parking lot, and I watched from across the street as months of manipulation finally clicked for him. "You used me, Patty," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Fed me promises about career advancement while you committed crimes right under my nose. I'm done." She tried her tears again, reaching for his arm, but Brian stepped back with disgust. "Save it for someone who hasn't seen the evidence. You're going down, and I won't let you drag the department with you." The mask finally slipped completely as Patty's face contorted with rage. "You pathetic small-town nobody," she snarled. "I offered you a future, and you're throwing it away for some warehouse worker. You'll regret this." Brian just shook his head and walked away, leaving her standing there shaking with fury. Later, he told me she'd been promising him connections to state law enforcement, political introductions, even hinting at backing him for sheriff. All lies to keep him under her thumb. The federal courthouse was a different arena, and Patty's Dallas lawyer came ready for war. He painted me as a bitter loner seeking revenge on successful neighbors, claimed the videos were edited, the witnesses coerced. For a moment, watching the jury's faces, I worried he might create enough doubt to let her slip away again. But then I played my ace, the Nevada documents, the previous victims' testimonies read into record, the pattern of behavior spanning states and years. When Patty took the stand, her composure cracked under cross-examination. "That was different," she screamed when asked about Nevada. "Those people were lying, just like he's lying now." The judge's gavel couldn't restore order as she ranted about conspiracies, about how everyone was against her, how she was the real victim. Her husband's involvement came to light. Financial records showing HOA funds diverted to offshore accounts. Property deeds with suspicious alterations. The final blow came when Todd took the stand, detailing every crime, every threat, every moment of Patty's reign of terror. She lunged at him, screaming "traitor," before court officers restrained her. The attempted assault on a witness was so blatant, so desperate, that even her Dallas lawyer started backing away. The investigation order was comprehensive, covering not just my case, but every property deal the HOA had touched during Patty's presidency. As we left the courthouse, Patty's shriek followed us. "You're finished, Dan. All of you." But her threats felt hollow now, the ravings of a dethroned queen. That evening, I watched from a distance as she met with her lawyer at an upscale restaurant. Their celebration premature and desperate. She raised a glass in a toast, her eyes glinting with malice, still believing she could win through sheer force of will. Then Brian called, and his shaky voice brought me back to reality. "Dan, Patty's got evidence that could shut you down for good. She's been holding it back, waiting for the right moment." My stomach dropped as I wondered what card she could possibly have left to play. The woman was cornered, exposed, and facing ruin. But cornered animals were the most dangerous. As I drove home, checking my mirrors for anyone following, I couldn't shake the feeling that Patty's final move would be her most vicious yet. The final evidence came through my cameras at 3 o'clock in the morning, and this time Patty had pulled out all the stops. 5 hired thugs descended on my lake like locusts, spray painting obscenities across my dock, dumping construction debris into the water, even taking baseball bats to the birdhouses I'd built with Emily. They wore masks, but moved with the casual confidence of men who'd been promised there'd be no consequences, tossing beer cans and laughing as they destroyed years of memories. But the best part, the part that would seal Patty's fate, was when one of them pulled off his mask to smoke, revealing a face I recognized from the Dallas lawyer's firm. These weren't random vandals. They were professionals hired to do maximum damage and send a clear message. I saved every second of footage, my hands steady, despite the rage burning in my chest, knowing this was Patty's death blow turning into suicide. She'd been so sure my cameras were broken, so confident in her ability to intimidate me into submission, that she'd ordered this destruction without even trying to hide the HOA's involvement. One of the thugs actually wore an HOA security jacket, the logo visible even in the infrared footage. The courtroom was packed for the final hearing, reporters filling every available seat, cameras waiting outside for the verdict that would make national news. I played the new footage on the big screen, watching the judge's face darken with each frame of destruction. The prosecuting attorney had done her homework, presenting financial records showing payments from HOA accounts to the vandals, text messages between Patty and her lawyer planning the attack, even voice recordings Todd had secretly made of Patty raging about her plans. "I want that lake so destroyed he'll beg to sell," her voice screeched from the speakers. "I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Nobody humiliates me and walks away." The Dallas lawyer tried to object, claiming the recordings were inadmissible, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Even he could see the ship was sinking, and he was already calculating how to distance himself from his toxic client. When the judge finally spoke, her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I've seen enough. The Crestview Heights HOA is hereby fined $100,000 for environmental damage and criminal conspiracy." But the real thunder came next. Furthermore, Patricia Ellison is removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately, and barred from holding any position of authority in any homeowners association in this state. The gavel came down like a hammer on Patty's coffin, and her scream of rage echoed through the courthouse. Her husband Richard faced his own reckoning as investigators uncovered years of financial manipulation. His law license suspended pending a full investigation. Brian stood at the back of the courtroom, and when our eyes met, he gave me a firm nod. Not quite the friendship we once had, but an acknowledgement of justice served. The Crestview News ran with the headline, "The HOA's Biggest Flop," complete with a photo of Patty being escorted out in handcuffs after she tried to assault the judge with her designer purse. The story went viral within hours, becoming a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the danger of underestimating the little guy. Local residents who'd suffered under her rule came forward with their own stories, painting a picture of a reign of terror that had lasted far too long. Then came my moment of triumph, the twist I'd been planning since that night at the land office. I stood before the assembled crowd of Crestview Heights residents, many of whom had supported Patty until the evidence became undeniable. "I have an announcement," I said, pulling out a deed that made several board members gasp. "Last month, I purchased 40 acres of Crestview Heights from the Morrison estate. Land that includes your community center, your pool, and yes, your precious golf course." The silence was deafening as the implications sank in. According to HOA bylaws, the largest landowner had certain voting rights, certain controls that Patty had exploited for years. As of today, I am dissolving the current HOA board structure and calling for new elections. Free elections without intimidation or manipulation. Patty, watching from where she stood with her lawyer, actually stumbled, her heel catching on the courthouse steps as the reality hit her. "How?" she gasped, her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. "How could you afford—" But I just smiled, thinking of the settlement money from my accident years ago. The money Emily had insisted we save for something important. This felt pretty important. "My papers don't just win," I told her as she was led away, her empire in ruins around her. "They laugh." The quote got picked up by every news outlet, becoming a meme within hours. But I was already gone, heading back to my lake for the party of the century. The whole community showed up, not just my old neighbors, but residents from Crestview Heights who'd been too scared to stand against Patty before. Evelyn had outdone herself with the barbecue, and someone had even brought a cake decorated with a fondant HOA queen falling off her throne. When she started reenacting Patty's courthouse stumble, complete with an impression that had everyone in stitches, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pure joy. A kid from the neighborhood recreated the whole stumble, adding dramatic sound effects that had the crowd howling with laughter. But the best moment came when I stood by the lake, now clean and clear again, and raised the toast to Emily. "This lake's our home, Emily," I whispered, my eyes shining with tears that were finally happy ones. "And it always will be." A stranger approached just as the party was winding down, a woman in her 30s with the tired look of someone fighting a losing battle. "Mr. Carver, I'm from Riverside Township, about 2 hours south. Our HOA makes Patty look like an amateur. They've seized 3 homes in the last year using forged documents, and the sheriff's in their pocket." She handed me a thick folder of evidence, her eyes pleading. "We heard what you did here. Will you help us?" I looked at the documents, seeing the same patterns, the same abuse of power, the same victims too scared or too poor to fight back. Part of me wanted to say no, to just enjoy my victory and my peaceful lake. But then I thought about Emily, about how she'd always said we were blessed to have this land and should help others when we could. "Let me look into it," I told her, already knowing I'd say yes. The fight against HOA corruption had become my calling, my way of honoring Emily's memory and my parents' dream of land ownership meaning something. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the lake reflected stars like diamonds, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked under my truck's windshield wiper was a scorched photo of my lake, the edges still warm, with new writing on the back. "This isn't over. P." I stared at the threat, feeling a mix of anger and anticipation. Patty might be down, but she wasn't out, and whoever was helping her still had access to my property. The smart thing would be to turn this over to Brian, let the law handle it. But something told me Patty's final play would be more personal than legal. I tucked the photo into my pocket, looking out at my lake one more time before heading inside. The war might be won, but apparently, the battle wasn't quite over. As I locked my door and checked my cameras, I couldn't help but smile. Let it come. I'd beaten her at her own game once, and I'd do it again. After all, this lake was our home, and nobody, not Patty, not her ghost from Nevada, not her hired thugs, was going to take that away.